Our next speaker is Lee Rainey, who is Director of Internet Technology Research at the Pew Research Center, which puts out all kinds of very valuable data that I use all the time in classes, so thank you. We'll be speaking about Africa's digital future, something that was very much at the top of the agenda, I think, during this Africa Leaders Summit. So Lee, welcome and thank you.
Thanks. And it's wonderful to be here. Adam was supposed to be my partner here, and so I'm going to fill in for him, and I'll probably take less time than we're scheduled for this, so we'll be put back on schedule. And I'm just delighted to be here. The Pew Research Center itself describes as a fact tank, not a think tank, because we are not in the business of advocating for things or coming up with policy solutions to problems or doing other kinds of advocacy. We get a lot of money from the Pew Charitable Trust, a major American philanthropy, to study things in a rigorous way. We do first-rate social science, particularly public opinion polls, but we don't do it from a position of advocating. I study the internet. I'm not funded to be a cheerleader for the internet or a detractor of the internet. I am supposed to talk about how the internet is affecting people, how they're using it, how it might be used in other kinds of things, but I'm not here to sell you something or to convince you of something. I've just got data to present. It was so striking to hear first the national security speech and then the panel before me, though, because technology seems to be infused in everything that you were talking about there, and it has a special character now to it in that immersion in life after the pandemic. It's been such a transformative thing that put people's dependence on technology as well as their affection for technology on a sort of new level. And it certainly accelerated a lot of the trends that we were already seeing in how the internet was being used for partnerships, for business development, for lifelong learning. Sort of everything that was talked about in the previous panel is sort of in play for us. So I come bearing data. We have, during the pandemic, we were not able to do surveys in developing countries, middle-income countries, because the major way that you do that, if you want to do it rigorously and accurately, is by door-to-door, face-to-face encounters, where you're asking people questions directly to them, because in some cases they don't have telephones, or in some cases they don't have internet access. So you want to make sure if you get good representative samples of populations, that you are talking to representative samples of people, no matter what their circumstances are. So a bunch of the data I'm presenting today is pretty old, because we didn't want to send people into people's homes, both for the sake of the interviewers who might get sick, or for the sake of the people we were encountering. We didn't want to get them sick. And so I'm sorry, I don't have more up-to-date data, but in many respects, you can sort of take the things I'm presenting now, bump them up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points, and you'll be capturing something pretty close to the current set of circumstances. So I've been doing this work for 23 years at the Pew Research Center. A lot of our work is focused on the United States, but we do international polling. And we've covered 3 big revolutions. I'm the luckiest social scientist ever to have existed, because the subject I study has gone through 3 big things in the time span I've been looking at it, and we know there's a 4th and a 5th just over the horizon. So that we've looked at the rise of just the internet and high-speed connectivity, broadband connectivity. That's revolution number 1. Revolution number 2 is mobile connectivity, which is an enormous story in Africa and other developing countries. And we've studied the rise of social media as a sort of separate force and a separate way that people interact. In many cases, when we talk to people in our interviews with them, they say they are social media users, but they say they're not internet users. There's such a sort of central place that these media play in people's lives that they don't even distinguish between the medium of connectivity and the thing that they are doing once they're on that connectivity. So it's sort of interesting to ask people, are you an internet user? Nope. Do you use Facebook? Do you use Twitter? Do you use WhatsApp? Absolutely. Love it. Couldn't do without it. So there are one dimensions of my life, even getting sort of accurate measurements. So here's the sort of developing country story and a couple of points in Africa and the three things I just described. So we asked about internet access just generally, and it's so interesting to see that many Africans start with their smartphone. They don't necessarily have a computer or a tablet computer at home, and so their main and only access to the internet is through their phone. Sometimes it's not even a smartphone; it's just a little phone that has a texting or an apps feature connected to it. And the two countries that we did this study in, South Africa and Kenya, had sort of interesting dimensions of that. They're less likely to use computers and a tablet, and a bit more likely than some of the other middle-income countries that we did surveys in. The mobile connectivity story is really interesting. In South Africa, it's enormously high, and in Kenya, it's sort of interestingly arrayed around a smartphone and a feature phone. A feature phone, does texting, does a couple of apps, but doesn't necessarily do the full array of things that a smartphone does. And basic phones, in Kenya, basic phones are still important and prominent and a central part of people's lives. And then we asked about messaging services and social media services, and the percentage of adults who use sort of the key ones that we asked about. In South Africa, 62% of adults use some sort of social media and related messaging services, and 41% do it in Kenya. So even among middle-income countries, it's not too terribly high. But the striking thing that we've seen as we've done interviews over the years is that each of these revolutions, each of these transformations has changed the way that people communicate and the way they get information, the way they create things, and the way they share things. So when they went through the internet revolution first, all of a sudden that gave them new imaginations about literally how many people they could access, how much information they could access, and ease of communication abroad. When they went to smartphones, of course, they started carrying around all this incredibly powerful information and communication device in their pocket. Lots of people now think of their smartphone as like another body part, another part of their brain, another extension of their arms, another extension of their voice, another extension of their hearing things. And it was amazing to see how their imaginations blossomed when they had those possibilities now in front of them. So this changes people, and we've been excited to see that not only here in the United States, but in all sorts of ways in other dimensions. So we did a sub-Saharan African focused piece of research a couple of years ago in those 6 countries, and we asked about sort of the stuff you do with digital technology, and we asked whether it's good or bad for you. And so the people, including non-internet users or non-technology users, we asked everybody, and they're so enthusiastic about the implications of digital technologies for education. They also think they're a big benefit for the economy, kind of the things you've been talking about in the summit was about in particular. Personal relationships, it's getting a little lower. They like it. They like the fact that they can communicate much more easily and much less expensively with other kind of people. So the volume and velocity of communication among people has changed. But when you get down here to politics and especially morality, there's a lot more mixed picture, particularly in those countries, sort of sensing that there are some nice, beneficial things that come from it, but also some enormously challenging things that disrupt normal cultural patterns, normal family patterns, the traditional things that have been going on in society. So, and that's a universal story. I mean, this is the particular sub-Saharan African story, but we talk to people around the world about this and get largely similar results, no matter where you are. What did I do? And then when we sort of broke it down, especially when it came to mobile phone owners and the kinds of things they do on their phones. Again, in those 6 countries from before, they love text messaging. They love taking videos and pictures. They are using social networking sites, but not as much as other things. In Africa, of course, the enormous story, and I would say the most powerful innovation that Kenya and then the rest of Africa has introduced to the world is M-Pesa, right? I mean, just the whole idea that you can exchange money and that minutes themselves, cell phone minutes themselves, are a kind of currency that you can trade with other people, especially in circumstances where maybe the local currency isn't too stable, or there isn't nearly as much access to it. You see tons of entrepreneurial activity built around people's cell phones, lending it out to others in the village, or performing other activities for people in the village. So it's the power of cell phone connectivity. It's such an interesting thing to see how people sort of innovated around it in ways that in the developed world weren't necessarily happening at very large scale. There's job seeking that's done on this, and of course those numbers would probably be significantly higher now, because so many employers now hunt for employees and recruit and make themselves sort of known to the world and do outreach using mobile connectivity. And then the news and information features are okay, but they're not overwhelmingly powerful. So for news about politics, getting health and medical information, getting consumer information and things like that, it's an important part of life, and it's growing. Again, these numbers are older, so the numbers would be probably higher, with many more people now using cell phones for these things than was the case when we did this survey. But it's that's part of the story. And we have now picked up such interesting evidence that when you talk to people about digital connectivity of all kinds, the internet, smartphones, and things like that, social media in particular, they tell a sort of really important love-hate story around digital technology. They like it for certain things, they're worried about or they're afraid of other kinds of things, and both things are true. The people who are enthusiastic also can speak very eloquently to some of the worries that they have, particularly the social worries, the societal worries, and things like that. So we ask questions about, does the phone tie you down or free them? In Africa, it's a freeing, liberating instrument. Does it make them waste time or helps them save time? Again, sort of in the two African countries in this, it's not even a close question. It's a time saver, and you don't always need it, or you couldn't live without it. In the African countries, it's like essential. That same point I was making before. It's a body part, and it's an essential part of how you sort of organize your time and your day. Then we ask about sort of the impact on sort of news and civic culture, and very large numbers of people say both things. More information, they get more information about current events, and it makes people much more easy to manipulate by giving them false information and misinformation. So there's this sense that this sort of the volume, velocity, and sort of variety of information coming into their lives can serve some good purposes, but also serve some sort of quite harmful purposes. The same thing, we got the ability of ordinary people in our country to have a meaningful voice in political process. This whole empowerment idea, significant numbers of people say absolutely. But the risk that people in our country might be manipulated, also, equal numbers, really. So people are holding very contradictory sensibilities about this, depending on what you're asking about and how they see it unfolding. And then we also see that it makes people more accepting of other people. There's a sense that more connectivity just has to make you a little bit more attuned to other people, a little bit more empathetic. You see their lives in interesting new ways, particularly strangers or people who are, whoa, what did I do?
I think it will.
Steering has stopped. Window closed. Okay, and then the opposite of that. That's pretty much it for that sort of the variety of ways. And I guess the thing to hold on to in this, and again, it's sort of we've done a lot of this international work. There's a sense in middle income. Yeah, there's a sense in developing middle income countries. We can kind of skip a generation of technology. We don't necessarily have to have the most robust, the most sophisticated broadband wired networks connected to our lives. The smartphone can do a good enough job in lots of the things that we need to do. So there's this sense that the loss of possibility hasn't occurred because these new devices in new ways with new kinds of connectivity bring that stuff into our lives. but there's also a sense that post-COVID, there's sort of a new normal about how people are thinking about relying on and sort of feeling the impacts of technology. It was so interesting to hear about sort of the Zoom innovations that George Mason was doing, just because that was how all the rest of us sort of accommodated the needs of our lives. So actually, I think that was my last slide, and I will get out of slide mode here. Stop sharing. And I'm just going to take some questions a little bit. And the nice thing is that Adam was going to tell you a lot more about technology, particularly in the African context, because he sort of lived that life. And if I can answer your questions, it seems like there are a lot of smart people in this room who can answer. So we're going to do a real internet thing. We're going to crowdsource if I can't answer questions, but I'd be really interested in what you're thinking.
I noticed you did not include Tunisia as you didn't include Tunisia as part of Africa. And
Yeah.
I know the U.S. government separates it out as part of the Middle East. But the Tunisians think they're part of Africa.
Yeah.
So is that something that you might reconsider and place them in Africa as you're looking at African countries?
Yeah, and we were following sort of the national sort of typology, which we often do, rather than creating our own, because you get yelled at if you create your own typology. But absolutely, and one of the reasons we wanted to have Tunisia in that mix of countries was because there was, the Arab Spring, the aftermath of the Arab Spring, the sense of, the social media brings possibilities as well as crackdowns and authoritarian crackbacks and things like that. That was exactly why we picked Tunisia for that particular study. But I'm going to report that back to my colleagues on that.
I'm Mihail Laulieru from the Impact Institute for the Digital Economy. The title of this supposed conversation, which is only now one person, was Digital Technology and Democracy. And so I'm somehow taken aback because digital technologies are empowering individuals. They have sparked a lot of movement in Africa and around the world. And I expected you will say something about that as well. Besides the amazing data which you presented, I just wonder if you have any comments in that regard and how are digital technologies acting in that way on the African continent?
It's going to seem like
corruption and so on and so forth.
I'm going to seem like I've paid you to ask that question because it's such a perfect question. I only wanted to take up a little bit of time because Adam was going to take up the rest of the time, but now I can answer that. Just last week, the colleagues who do the international work put out a major report about social media and democracy in multiple countries. Some of them are middle-income countries, a lot of them are developed countries. But what felt true about the broad conclusions of that report applying to the African context is that more people think that social media is good for democracy than think it's bad for democracy. The exception is the United States of America, where people are much more inclined to think that social media is destroying trust, is destroying confidence in institutions, is destroying the sense that the electoral process is working the way it should, that the medical system is working the way it should. So Americans are really down on social media and have been for a while. It's so striking to see that in developed countries and in a number of developing countries, it's not even a close question. It's almost 2-to-1 as an average margin, and people think it's beneficial. And what they talk about when they do that is more voices. You get to participate in your society in ways that you probably weren't able to pre-internet. You get to command the attention of the political and elite classes. You just get to say your stuff, and if lightning strikes, it goes viral, and you can't not be noticed. It's a great way to find people who believe the same thing that you do. So one of the limits, of course, of sort of modern democracies is that parties articulate the interests of different groups. And if you've got a particular interest, you don't necessarily care what the other elements of the party structure are. You want to find people who share that same view and make common cause with them, go to the streets with them, sign petitions with them, interact with public officials and elites over them. And so the internet and especially social media is a powerful way to find like-minded people and to find your allies. And of course, one of the amplifying things of the internet is that you can bring many more voices to that cause. And you
do
could,
you have any information particular to Africa?
I will go back and get it. If you go to our site, pewresearch.org, you will see that report. And I know we're going to be doing a lot more work on that once we're now able to be back in the field. The next survey is scheduled for next summer. And yeah, I think the African sentiment, well, you tell me. I mean, those of you who know it, does that feel true to the experiences that you know about? Yes? No? Yes? Okay, we got a minor yes. Yeah. Yeah, let's.
Good morning. Is this on? No. Let me give that. Good morning. So, to maybe bridge the first panel and your points. First panel, we talked about innovation, and we talked about the importance of cross-learning between universities and partnerships between the U.S. and Africa, which is just a wonderful evolution as opposed to I'm bringing knowledge to you. And here we're talking about mobile technology, which at the time when mobile technology was taking off in Africa, we in the United States did not have portable numbers, right? Whoever you signed up with, the carrier you signed up with, you had to stick with what seemed for a lifetime. Africa innovated on mobile technology, is the birthplace of fintech, okay?
Nice.
And now we're seeing and we're hearing that through mobile technology, the whole underlying assumption of a functioning democracy, which is information, free information, access to information, disclosure, right, is happening. I want to take us to a real conundrum in U.S. Africa, Africa-U.S. relations. And speaking of transparency, I brought governance expertise to the U.S. Africa, U.S. Businesses in Africa Awards program as recently as October of this year. Because corporate disclosures in the United States lags the rest of the world. Our SEC is new to the party of requiring disclosure. March of 2022 is when they first put forward a proposal on climate change disclosure by US companies. Similarly, cyber. To what extent in this cross-learning can we make sure that corporate governance does not lag because of US engagement?
That's an enormous question.
Crowdsource.
Yeah. And I'm sure you have thoughts on that, so I might return the mic to you. So there are a couple things going on. One of the other ways in which disclosure on this side of the United States feels insufficient is literally who has access. You know, the long-running attempts of the Commerce Department to create maps about who doesn't have access, particularly since one of the predictors of limited access or no access is geography. And so the fact that the maps are not particularly accurate and particularly fulsome is sets back, or at least it's a challenge now to policymakers to even think through that stuff. One of the challenges, and we actually face it as researchers in trying to get access to data, is of course that it's privately held, and sort of the invocation of business needs or business proprietary information and things like that is a pretty significant, part of the conversation that takes place between the policy community as well as the research community on these things. And so governance stuff is a central issue here, and to the degree that there are ways in which that the African story might be transported here, or at least encouraged here. That's probably something that a lot of the policy community and the civil society here would like. The other thing, of course, that fits into this issue that you've raised is that so much of the technology of the applications themselves are run by American corporations. You know, that's brought some benefits and access to parts of the world that might not have otherwise had it, but it also means that Americanness of social media and other kinds of core applications, and God knows, you know, I didn't even refer to the next revolutions that are around the corner in artificial intelligence, the metaverse, and things like that. I mean, there's a really interesting set of policy questions and sensibilities to be considering about who runs what, and how much they control about it, and what they're even doing with your data, which freaks out Americans as well as other people around the country, around the world, because they're confused about it, as well as completely in the dark about how they're being profiled, how all of this aggregation of information adds up to a really deep picture of who they are, what their preferences are, how they might be subject to moderating behavior kinds of things and things like that. That's not a fulsome answer to your question, but these are big hot issues in America, but the legal regime under which American corporations can operate is one of the things that's part of this story here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Take a couple more. Are you saying it's time? Okay, we'll wrap up shortly. Let's take a couple at a time. Sorry.
Hi, do you segregate your data, or do you analyze your data by various demographics, such as urban versus rural, education, sex, age? I'd be particularly interested in age. Younger people think differently than older people about digital issues.
Yeah, we have the stock and trade of representative polling that's exactly what you can do. You can break apart, and there are really important distinctions on everything that I talked about, and this kind of stuff too, related to privacy, by gender. Age is an enormously important one, and particularly in the context of the summit and sort of global communications, there's such an interesting universal story to tell about how young people think about this stuff, they create on it, act on it in way different ways from their elders. They do different things. I mean, they create different kinds of stuff. But this general sense that this is a liberating thing, this is a creative catalyst for me. I can do things that my parents and my grandparents could never do. I mean, that's absolutely a universal, global story. So yes, and we sort of by every standard demographic, yes. We also have some really nice insights by psychographic, how people sort of approach life. They, particularly if they're risk averse, they think differently about artificial intelligence than people who are risk enjoying, or at least risk taking and things like that. So yes, if you go to the Pew Research site and you go and find your way to the internet research, we have table upon table upon table upon table on all the demographics of this. So maybe one. You're calling, not mine.
I'm getting a signal that it's no. Yeah, I think we will have to close there, but that was full of information, and I hope people can grab it.
Yeah, I just
Oh, okay. Will our next panel then come to the fore?
would that be?
Public diplomacy, global engagement.
I am the panel.
Are you going to talk at the podium?
Oh, you sit down. I have to do a PowerPoint. Me too. So do you want to? Okay. You don't have it. Yes. That's it. Yeah. There we go.
So for this panel on citizen diplomacy, we have Dan Whitman, who is a former diplomat He's with the Public Diplomacy Council of Africa, and he's actually a very beloved instructor, professor here at GW. When students mention him, they say, "Oh, Dan." So, welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Jennifer. I pay them to say that they like the course. Boy, this has really been instructive. We've been ghosted by Adam, who was supposed to say long and distinguished career. And I would say long, but not necessarily distinguished. I used to work at the gray building across the street, and I occasionally teach in Jennifer's program, which is growing and thriving. Already, even before I start, Ushahidi. We didn't talk about Ushahidi. Whatever happened to Ushahidi? Kenya created the commerce of exchanging money by cell phone. Does Ushahidi still exist? It does. We used it in the U.S. Embassy in Conakry when they were building up to elections in 2009. And it's a funny story because, it's a wonderful mechanism, and we're talking about digital, I suppose, at this session. And the idea was citizens can witness voting procedure, and they can report in by free cell phone text. And I forget the exact proportions, but about 20% of it was reporting on conditions in the voting booths. 50% of it was men looking for women to hook up with, and the remaining was incitement to ethnic and racial violence. So the tool does not always lend itself to the best use. And we just heard from Lee Rainey about the skepticism in the U.S., I think well justified. Other observations, I remember being with a very wonderful group in Brazzaville, just a self-formed group that just wanted to learn English, and nobody had organized them. And when I asked if they had cell phones, they all pulled out their cell phones. And I said, well, how do you use these? Well, we talk to one another. I said, do you have internet? No. It occurred to me, why is no one installing hotspots in cities like Brazzaville, where how much would it cost to have 3 hotspots in a capital city where everybody has a cell phone and nobody has access to internet? Wouldn't that be an answer to the problem? I just leave you with that. And on whether Tunisia is part of Africa, I think everybody knows this, but the Department of State considers the Maghreb NEA for cultural and historic reasons, whereas the Department of Defense considers the Maghreb Africa. So happily, the White House made the right decision in including the Maghreb in this summit. Okay, I'm going to have to race through this, and Felicia, I don't know if this will allow me to show let's see, I've already messed this up. This wire, while we're doing this, here's a younger Dan Whitman, 42 years ago, with his mobilette in Brazzaville. I know that you have very good peripheral vision. Deep at the back of this photo, you can see the Congo River, and so this is how I became involved. I was a Fulbrighter. You could say why. Well, I was the only applicant for Brazzaville, so it's okay. Yes, okay. Here, can we forgive the 13 seconds of ad? Nobody in this room needs to see this, but it's so much fun. It's one below. Yes, wonderful. And I hope we can get the audio. It's a 3-minute video. Let's just remember what young Africans can do when they form a group. And forgive the 13 boring seconds of ads. 27 seconds. It has to do with intellectual property. 15 seconds, 14, 13. As I say, this won't surprise anybody, but let's remember how fun it is to work with young Africans.
Press the full.
There we go.
Who thought that teenagers who knew nothing about aviation could build a plane and it could be perfectly safe, and it is going to fly from Cape Town to Paris? I'm Agnes. name is Kamogetse Siamela, and I built the beautiful wings on this plane. And I also built the center fuselage, and I also built the horizontal and the vertical stabilizer.
First they thought that the plane won't fly, it's just a model. My name is Resoho Moroga and I'm 18 years old, and I built the central fuselage, which is known as the cockpit.
My name is Lesoho Mahlodi Masheng. I am 16 years old. So this part that sticks out is what I was actually building. Because we live in a society that's so stereotypical, especially when it comes to teenagers, a lot of people were actually shocked. Like, what are they doing? This was just a dream. It was going to fail.
It took us 10 days to build this plane. It was very difficult because you had to read from engineering manuals, and you need to have a 3D type of brain to be able to see what you're doing.
Building this airplane was not an easy task at all. It came with a lot of challenges, mostly because it was the first time holding, some of the tools that we were using to build this airplane.
The challenges that I faced was teamwork, but then I learned that if I can change my point of view, my own perspective, I can work in a team.
So we're going to be flying this plane from Cape Town to Cairo. So we're going to be flying that tens and thousands of kilometers. I don't even know how much it is.
I've always wanted to become a commercial pilot, but this project has helped me realize that there are other things in aviation besides just flying an airplane.
I would like to tell my peers and youth and everyone, if we can build a plane, you can build a spaceship. You can do whatever you want to do.
Is that not fun? Is that not fun? I mean, and that, let's see, that, I guess we go back. Yeah. So, many of us, most of us have had this experience. It's just, it's so enlightening and so much fun to work with. And what is the secret of this group? The teamwork. One of the people said that, I won't rationalize and say Africans do teamwork, but this group certainly does. And that's a great strength and something that any country can learn from, including the United States. Our teamwork, theirs is really outstanding. That's the good news. And here's the bad news. Professor Johnson has already introduced some of these, and I won't read them for you. I know you can read, but these stats are pretty grim. You said, I think 4%, maybe the World Bank says 3% of the students in Africa are in tertiary institutions. That's not good. And here, this very bottom, you can read through all these things. The very bottom one, is this not shocking? If every girl in sub-Saharan Africa completed even just primary education, the maternal mortality rate would decrease by 70%. So we have some huge challenges here. And in particular with university enrollment, which is slender. Now the figures are not favorable. I know I need to shorten this because we're running out of time, but the point I want to make today is there are centers of excellence. They're small, they're anecdotal. I think they have contact with one another. I don't know if America can assist in getting centers of excellence more in touch with one another so that they can do the work that the U.S. government has dropped out of. And we heard also sort of really plummeting participation in U.S. government. Rest in peace. USIA, remember those university partnerships? Remember? 1990s, finished, gone. USIA had a very nice, I think there were $500,000. They would link a university with a university, very nice. AID having much more money. I think they had maybe $5 million for a 3-year program. That's gone. And likewise, in U.S. government investment, it's there, and it's very nice to hear that YALI will be increased by $1 million or 1.5. We love YALI, but let's be frank. U.S. government will partner. U.S. government can convene, but we're really into public-private partnerships in our future. This is not reason for gloom and depression. It's just the scene has changed. We're no longer being driven by U.S. government programs. some of the partner, this AAU is the African Association of Universities, which is a really, really viable partner. And my point is, the partnerships and the linkages that we have and we could have are going to be anecdotal. They're not going to be broad. There's no collection point. IIE doesn't keep figures on this exactly. I don't know if anybody does. Maybe the ECA Bureau at the State Department might have some figures, but basically you're on your own in terms of one-to-one linkages. But as Lee Rainey and others have reminded us, we're in a different realm. We're no longer one-to-one. We are region to region. We are consortium to consortium. Here's some of the multilaterals. Some of them are bilaterals. Just to see, who's involved in this. Well, each of these organizations has a separate agenda, and they're all contributing. But it's a mishmash, and we just have to accept that and not whine and complain about it, but use it for the best advantage that we can. For the United States, what can we do? We can work, and we are working. That is the Association of Southern Colleges in the United States, the Southeastern universities, just back from a trip to West Africa. They're going to be giving a readout pretty soon on what they found. I think the future is going to be more regional rather than one-to-one. I think I might just skip over very quickly, since we're running short on time, the CHIP project called Networked. This is a big, big initiative convened by the National Academy of Sciences. We call it the E-family. It's a bureau, but the bureau at the State Department, which deals with economics, it's so big that they call it a family instead of a bureau. They got in with a proposal and have been getting very positive signs about something they call Networked. And we're talking here about a public-private partnership, skipping ahead in some of this material. Google, Microsoft, and Facebook have all been laying underseas cables, some of them 45,000 kilometers long, going from North America all around the continent for exchange of data. So we're looking at, we're looking at data and large, maybe impersonal contact, but that's the way it is. Let's not judge it. Let's do what we can with that. We are into a phase of ICT. COVID basically interrupted, to some extent, these actual linkages back and forth. So what we have remaining, but building very quickly, and the summit yesterday, a very big initiative was announced. What are they calling it? The DTA, the Digital Transformation of Africa. It's an ask of the U.S. Congress. We don't know if the Congress will provide the $450 million that DTA is requesting for digital connectivity. I'm not digital. I'm just observing what there's my own participation has been, with people mainly, and I'm totally in favor of this stuff. It's not anything that I've mastered. Now, my one message, if I have one, is let's recognize that these are anecdotal. They're tiny. They don't involve the numbers that we need accommodated. But the centers of excellence, I have some examples. One is Patrick Awua's Ashesi University. Is this a Felicia? There's a brief video. Never mind. We don't have time. But Ashesi is a paradise if you've ever been there. Patrick Awua is a graduate of Swarthmore. He went to work with Microsoft. He became very wealthy. He decided, I'm going to create Swarthmore in Ghana. It's the Ashesi University. It's a paradise. If we had time, I'd show you this video. It's a tiny campus, but it's a very happy place. Now, it's tiny numbers in an hour from Accra, and then we get to, I think you all are familiar with Fred Swaniker, a Yali alumnus, who created the African Leadership University. Wow. I happened to be in Mauritius the year that their first graduation, this is it, what a happy occasion this was. They started in 2015, 15, 17, I guess 18, 19. The first graduation, look at the joy here. These are my photos, by the way. Look at that. Are we having fun? Yeah. I mean, this guy is cool. He's cool. And there's some connection with the University of Scotland. Once the bagpipes, this was a very fun occasion. These were very happy people. Door prize for someone who can tell me who the speaker was that day. Do you recognize Graça Michel? Graça Michel. She was the speaker. It was really exciting. So there's a center of excellence, and ALU, ALA, it has two names. I believe, my understanding is it's in Mauritius, Johannesburg, and Kigali, I think, but it's tiny. Can Ashesi and ALA get together and make a model for the public systems in Africa that really don't have the resources, but the ideas are not lacking? Some of you may know Erastus Mongari, who lives up the street, created something called Startup Africa, which is education. His goal is to create 1 million startups in Africa. Nothing modest about Erastus Mongari. But the startups involve learning. So this is another type of way of thinking. And then who might this be? Let's see, do we know this guy? The creator of Access, which now is basically at Wits University, but Gilbert reminds us that there's going to be a similar one in Pretoria and a similar one in Nairobi. This guy's a visionary. Now, Adam asked me to say, so what, public diplomacy, what is it that we can consider doing or should be thinking of doing? Regional consortia seem to be where the action is these days. Associated College of the South, I mentioned the underseas cable. This is big. Underseas cable, 45,000 kilometers, 3 of them to exchange data. The challenge, of course, is having partners on the African continent able and willing to use the data. They'll have everything that a research institute could hope for. They just need to be motivated or positioned to actually utilize this. The CHIPS project, this is the thing, the E family and the National Academy of Sciences. This is not quite gelled, but this is going to be the answer to the cables themselves. This will be, how do you manage this data? How do you replicate it and train people able to use it? I spoke by Zoom to a group of Ethiopian educators last month. Ethiopia used to have, I think, 4 universities, and within a couple of years, there will be 40. Now, this is a huge expansion, and I didn't quite know what to tell them. Instead of telling them things, I asked them things that they need to decide. We can't decide for them. Is STEM everything? Is everything STEM? STEM gets you a job. Should humanities have an equal position of prestige or usefulness at a university? Not for me to tell them. They're all into STEM. That's fine. But also educate did you know that in the United States, 50% of Americans read only at a 6th grade level? Did you know that? This implies a question. Who do you educate? Do you educate elites because they are more likely to succeed? Do you take education as a social responsibility to lift the level of the entire society? That's a big undertaking. And it's certainly beyond the system in the United States and maybe beyond the governments in Africa as well. But they need to decide what are they aiming for? Do you want compassion or standards? If someone has just undergone a trauma, as many young people have done on all continents, do you bend the rules when it's time to give them grades? The answer from the Ethiopian educators tended to be, no, we must maintain standards. Well, if that's your decision, okay. How will you treat students who've lost a sibling or a parent, or whose village has been attacked by terror. I mean, wow, these are pretty big. Now, research versus teaching, that's an American dilemma. Rankings, I'm absolutely opposed to rankings. I congratulate Yale for pulling out of the U.S. News and World Report rankings that are phony baloney. I think Harvard's about to do the same. I said to the Ethiopians, do you want rankings? Really? I mean, like, you have to decide. What's the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom? We don't have time to discuss that, but what are your expectations of students when they come in as first-year students? If they don't have all the skills, do you want to give them bridge programs or don't you? Or do you want to only bring in students that have the capacity? And the John Dewey model of learning by doing. This is a very American thing. The universities that I've seen, a few collectively, tend to go by the European tradition of rote learning. The professor speaks, the student writes it down. There are alternatives. It's for you, the Ethiopians, to decide which one of these do you want to go for. How do humans transmit information? Some of you, I hope, are familiar with Amadou Ampateba, the philosopher born in 1900, Mali, and his famous expression, "Quand un vieillard meurt, c'est une bibliothèque qui brûle." When an old man dies, that's a library burning down. Now, it's a beautiful sense of knowledge being encapsulated in an individual mind. But how do you transmit information? You can transmit from the older generation to the younger, which is the model we've had for 40,000 years. Maybe that's good enough. But these are questions that African educators should be encouraged to think about. Do you increase knowledge by actual discovery, empirical, experimental experience? Do you learn from books, stories, campfire, etc.? And a quote from someone you don't know, Roland Castle, an American novelist: "All wisdom comes from stories." Did you ever notice that when you learn something through a story, you're more likely to remember it? Now, this is the announcement that was made yesterday. It's not gelled. It's Ambassador Ray reminded me, it kind of depends on the Congress, doesn't it? It's a nice notion. It involves all these organizations as partner organizations. It's cool. I hope it happens. But notice, this is not partnership. This is digital. We're in a new situation. It's not for me to judge. Maybe none of us wants to judge. We just need to understand that's what's happening. And US, what can we do? My point that I want to leave is, let's, all of us, we all have anecdotal experience with centers of excellence in Africa. I gave you 4 examples. There are a dozen others. How can we as a group get them in touch? I don't know, is Access in touch with Ashesi or with ALA? But maybe we, through the convening power of the US government or whoever, the Association of Southern Colleges, can assist these centers of excellence in getting together, because they're all first rate, but they're tiny, and figure out a way of sharing their knowledge with the larger, the Makereres and the Legon universities that are kind of suffering from overpopulation. And of course, every presentation has to end with a cat, a dog, or a child. And so that's my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Next we will have, at a point where I can't see anything, Ms. Lorna Johnson from the Sister Cities International Africa region. I think it should come back on. I think what we will do is save questions until we get into the discussion. So we'll move straight into the business after this, and then we'll come back for comments on Dan and more.
Okay. Ms. Felicia, helping to put this up? Yeah. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Lorna K. Johnson. I serve as the African representative for Sister Cities International, but you are very much infiltrated today by several of my colleagues. First and foremost is our board member, Judge Bill Littlejohn, who's from Houston, Texas. my other colleagues who are country representatives, Rhonda Pierce, who's a country representative for Tanzania, Nina C.L. Ra, who's a country representative for Namibia, and Dr. Robert Ford, who's our country representative for Liberia. And of course, our partners, Dr. Gilbert, who's we've been working with for about 3 years, and my other partner in crime. I won't say how long we've been working together, but I pulled them over for Sister Cities. Mr. Michael Sudakasa, and of course his wife, Young, is here. So just briefly, because some of you may know about Sister Cities or know, good or bad, to be honest with you, but we're really in a new vision for the organization to be very strategic about our partnerships in the Africa continent. I know it was just said, and I'm very happy to hear, particularly when Secretary Blinken was in South Africa this summer, that he did announce, as my colleague just said, a new assistant secretary for sub-regional partnership, not just for Africa. So there will be a new secretary under the State Department who is looking at these sub-regionals, because we honestly believe that the way to develop not only Africa, but with the U.S., our partnership is really at the sub-region which the cities are. Just briefly, if you don't know, we were actually formed in 1956 by President Eisenhower. And the reason why that is still significant, because the countries that he developed this for are still the leading countries that have sister cities. So those countries are naturally what? Japan. We have over 350 sister cities in Japan, about 160 with France. The big elephant in the room, even though it wasn't part of it, is now China. Pretty much every city has Chinese sister cities, and there's a few others. But to get to our point, that Africa wasn't in the vision. And we're not surprised, are we? To be honest with you, it wasn't part of the ethos of what the partnerships. So it took two components, both here in the West and in the African continent, to move the agenda forward for U.S. Africa. First, it took 16 years after the first sister cities to have an African sister city. 16 years, and that was in the early 70s. This is just some of the things that we do. I'll be more than happy to talk about. But what I really want to talk about is how we're looking at developing our African sister cities. So the first sister cities, and I think it's so appropriate now, and you'll agree with me, was Los Angeles and Lusaka. Under Tom Bradley, a very visionary leader of not a majority city at LA. And guess what do we have now? Mayor-elect Karen Bass. So we are very happy because, as we all know, she was the chair of the subcommittee on Africa and global health. And we're really looking at Mayor Bass now, I think she was sworn in, to really be a leader for cities on the importance of these partnerships. Now, I can't tell you, there are about 6 cities just biting at the bit to become sister cities with LA. But it really has, and in the 90s, we had a mayor out in Denver who really kind of opened it up. But it really has taken leaders, mostly mayors of color, but not all, to open this discussion. And once colonialization was over, leaders in Africa. So that kind of promulgated what these partnerships. So as the young lady said when she was talking about cities, it does take people who have an infinite interest in the African continent. So as I mentioned about sister cities around the world, we only have 133, but right now, because of the great work that my colleagues have been doing, we now have 140 for the continent. Now, in my opinion, that's abysmal. That's abysmal when you have over that much for the country of France. So an army of us, and it is a small army, have really decided to move this agenda forward, to push U.S. Africa sister cities. And one of the vehicles that we're doing this with, which everybody has, is our first SEI Africa Region Conference that's going to be in Cape Town. We strategically chose Cape Town. We've done a few meetings in Accra. If the Kenyans have it their way, we're going to be in Nairobi the next time we do it, right, Pra? But this is providing all of us a forum for those who are looking for sister cities from the African continent, as well as to provide our U.S. cities an opportunity to increase. Because the issue is not the African cities. There's plenty who want to be sister cities with the U.S. It's our U.S. cities. And like many local leaderships, they don't know, they got issues, all the things that we talk about in a general conversation of why the U.S. hasn't been engaged. And being here at the summit, I was at the president's meeting on Wednesday. I hope that's going to change. And I really am looking forward for Mayor Bass to be kind of a spokesperson. She has a lot of other issues she has to deal with in Los Angeles, but I really do think with her platform, she can be a person who talks about the need to engage local cities with the African continent and various cities. So the summit that we're doing is really to speak to that. We're looking to support our current sister cities. We're looking to increase our sister cities. And what many of you know, which has been on the soft side, is to really support the communities of Cape Town. Most of us who know South Africa is a very different country than the rest of the continent, and Cape Town is even different than the rest of the country. So we're making sure that we connect with underserved communities while we're there, including having the second half of our second day in Langa Township. We are taking the conference to an area where we wouldn't normally do that. So let me just say a couple things about why we are looking to do this. First, our relationships with Africa have mostly been very donor-driven. Like we've been talking, people going to Africa to help, boreholes, and that's fine. Schools. I started my sister cities when I was a deputy mayor in a small city in New Jersey, and we built a clinic. Rhonda's actually from Durham, North Carolina, and she has a wonderful clinic in Arusha that I happened to visit about a month ago. We have other projects in Liberia. But really is at the heart, as has been said before, is that we want to pivot and change our relationship as looking at the continent as a partner. And I think that's been the kind of overall conversation that I've heard, and not as a donee, so to speak. So much of our conversation in Cape Town would be to help U.S. cities realize that working with African cities, working with African business people, men and women, that there are opportunities to help your local cities with that. We have Houston pretty much represented, I guess about 3 people, right, Doc? From Houston. Mayor Turner has been a major supporter of Africa. He has a major conference day on the African, Union Day in May, where ambassadors come. He brings that to life. But we're hoping that others are going to be doing that from an economic component, utilizing the diaspora community. I think we cannot deny that there's a large diaspora community in many of our cities, and quite frankly, many of our African sister cities in the U.S. have been started by diaspora communities. So we look at Minnesota, where we have Somalians, we have that. Many of our ones that we have in the South. So all of this is kind of percolating, and we were just glad and appreciative that the president had a summit right before our event. But we are really, really serious about what we want to do. We're so serious, and we have information on that we have a commitment to increase our sister cities by 505. Being in Africa, you are bold, you are bodacious, so we're going to take that on. And I just came from Cape Town last week, and I was in East Africa about a week ago, and 2 weeks ago, and people are ready for the U.S. to become serious. But what we need are the U.S. cities' commitment. So if you are interested in forming a sister cities, just briefly, you have to get your mayor or whoever your current chief executive is. Once he or her agrees that they're interested in having a sister city, and then you partner with your local sister city. There's plenty of us here to tell you about how that's done, but it really is about making it on a one-to-one. Because the only way that we're going to change our attitudes about the continent is on a people-to-people. So I'll just give you a brief little story. I grew up here in D.C. I'm a Washingtonian. I'm 4th generation. My father grew up right here on Q Street Northwest. I do live in the New York City, New Jersey now. So when I started doing my work in Africa, and he's a proud Howard grad, he's like, what the heck are you doing? I spent all this money for you to go to law school, blah, blah, blah. Came home one time, he was reading the Washington my work, somebody said, oh, you have all these items, all these things. No, we're sharing this with Lorna. My point is that because of my interaction, somebody who didn't really, father very well educated, he's an economist, started changing his attitude about the continent. And that really is what Sister Cities does. You know, it does it through our exchanges, it does it through our relationship, because it's going to be us, the voters, who said, well, you know, I've been to Nigeria. Okay, we know no, Nigeria is not like that. You know, I've been to different countries. So part of what we do with that really strong people to people is to change people's attitudes about the continent. So that's really critical. Let me also share with you what I consider a really highly prized university partnership. Louisville, those of you know, Louisville, Kentucky has been sister cities with Tamale. Some of you know Ghana, Tamale, Ghana, for 35 years. Louisville. With their partnership with the University of Louisville and with members of sister cities, they helped to set up a hospital and medical school in Tamale. And that school and medical center has been going on for 35 years. So you have students from Louisville going to Tamale, and then you have citizens, people like us, who support the progress. So that's just one big example. They've been doing it. Now, interestingly, what they do, Tamale, and that's is mostly Islamic area, they require whoever that leader is from Louisville to become a traditional leader, which I think is really good, because they want to make sure that that leader becomes really involved with that community. So they just had, and the person this time is a Queen Mother. Those of us who know Ghana know what the role of Queen Mothers are. But we have plenty of examples where it succeeds. We get hit a lot because people do sign these MOU agreements and nothing happens. But the people that you see here and that are going to be in Cape Town, they're the ones that are making it happen. We are very much hopeful that Mayor Bass will be coming. She's expressed an interest in coming. We think it would be great because we really think that she can speak. California is our biggest sister city state. Internationally, doesn't matter whether it's just Africa, it's all over. So those of you from USC, thank you for getting involved, hopefully. And just as important, we really want to make a difference for people to understand, as we've been saying for years, Africa matters. But Africa can matter individually, not just on a policy or ivory tower level, that you can make a difference. You can create a social entrepreneur project. You can do some things with women entrepreneurs. All these things happen. You can provide with your nursing background dedication. And just as it was said, there is so much going on in the African continent that we can learn from. And that's what Sister Cities is about, that mutual respect, that support that doesn't go in saying we have all the answers, but we have some suggestions and also do you. So if you don't see your country here, that means we need a Sister Cities, okay? Ghana, as always, has the most. I don't think that's surprising to people, and because it's close, English friendly, we really have a strong development with Francophone Africa. Matter of fact, we'll have a session on that. Not only we'll have translators. South Africa, believe it or not, we have about 7. I don't know what it says here, 7, and we're working, and the U.S. Embassy is very much involved with all of these to help, because now Secretary Blinken and the President have a subnational. So we think this is going to be our decade to promote sister cities. They've been lagging, but they took, as we said, they got several new sheriffs in town, and all of us are about to make that happen, and hopefully use this platform for better U.S. Africa sister cities. I'm more than happy to take questions, and if you're not involved with your local sister cities, please see one of us and we can show you how that's done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a really great, energizing presentation. We're going to move straight to the business panel now, and Dr. Lerner we're going to do discussion at the end, just so we stay on touch. So Carol Pino will be moderating. Nima Nedeljkovic is on his way. We have Michael Sudarkasa and Professor Winstead. Yeah, why don't you
All right, well, hello, and we are really looking forward to this panel. Unfortunately, Mima Nedeljkovic, as happens during a great big summit like this, he was on a panel with the Nigerian president and couldn't get away. So he is now racing by taxi over here, but we will have him in a moment. In the meantime, we are thrilled to have the panel that we have. This is the session on the U.S. Business in Africa Awards that was the brainchild of the University of Witwatersrand, the Africa Center for the Study of the U.S. And so Mima Nedeljkovic is the co-chair of the U.S. Business in Africa Awards, and Michael Sudarkasa is a governing board member and also the CEO of the Africa Fertilizer and Agribiz Partnership. And Joyce, who has very kindly stepped in for Mima, was in charge of the judging. And Dr. Wheeler Winstead, the assistant director for the Center for African Studies at Howard University. And full disclosure, I'm a journalist, but I am also on the board of this. So, but let's talk about what the U.S. Business in Africa Awards are. Michael, if you can start, this is sort of a surprising thing. An African institution is going to award businesses from America on how well they're doing in Africa. That was game changing.
Yeah, thank you. And can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
During COVID, and that's when this initiative was conceptualized, there was a lot of diplomacy around getting PPR to different countries that were struggling on the continent. And we thought, and again, as was mentioned, I'm on the governing council, close friend of Access, has been working with Gilbert and Bob for about 3 years ago. That, you know, there's CCA, there's AmCham, that have their own recognition, but you don't have African institutions recognizing good corporate citizenship from U.S. companies on the continent. And the U.S. is a major partner of Africa for decades. And so we thought about conceptualizing a way to not only recognize this good corporate citizenship, to inspire it, but also to ensure that many more, and particularly young people, because we were coming out of a university context, were aware of the presence of U.S. corporates in Africa and what they were doing, how they were contributing. And so we set out to start thinking about how do you do this with credibility. And so the aforementioned Dr. Mima Nedeljkovic, who has been a friend and mentor of mine over many decades, I don't want to say how long, but was involved and integrally in starting CCA and AmCham. We reached out to help give us credibility with corporate America on this side. At the same time, because we were situating this within WITS, we felt like immediately, and WITS, if you're not aware, is also the seat of African Research Institutional Alliance, and I may get that acronym wrong, but there's about 17 major African research institutions that are led in part by WITS, University of Ghana in Legon. And so we thought, here's a way to now start having both younger Africans be aware of this presence, and then those studying in the U.S. to be aware of this presence. And my alma mater is the University of Michigan, but I'm the son of academicians. My mother headed Lincoln University in the 90s. I was very excited about this initiative because I thought what we haven't captured adequately are case studies about the U.S. activity on the continent. I used to teach before moving to South Africa about 23 years ago at Georgetown Business School. Before it was the McDonough Business School, it was just the Georgetown Business School. And I taught a course on doing business in Africa. And I struggled to find case studies on US corporates doing business in Africa. So here was an opportunity in creating this awards to start us down this path and create, again, much more recognition of this role. Many of the corporates on the continent just do their business. And they do their business often through headquarters for that activity from the Middle East and Europe. So the engagement is through London, France, Dubai. And so if you're a US-based young person, you don't even hear about how to get involved in these initiatives. So that's a little bit of the genesis. We held our first awards just this year, a few months ago. And this is a great panel discussion because this allows us to start the process of planning for next year. I'll stop there.
Well, all right, well, that's great. Thank you so much. And for me, what was really exciting was the idea of Africans judging US companies and seeing whether they were doing well. And I think a lot of times we look at the bad things. You know, that's all, as a journalist, I can say that's all that rises to the point of news. So it's nice to hear about what's happening with the good things. Now, Joyce, you were in charge of the actual judging and who got ahead and who didn't. Can you tell us about that process? I know I was on many of the meetings where they really, really went in depth to how this was going to be done and how seriously everyone was taking it. Yeah, and so I'd love if you can walk us through the process and who won.
Not sure that. Good morning and thank you for being here. I was honored to be asked to contribute governance expertise to the U.S. Africa, U.S. Businesses in Africa Awards Program. And I'm in a season of yes, so I said yes. And said yes in part because it was university housed, and so it wouldn't be only the awards, but the case studies and the young people learning that all that is real is not on the internet, is not on TikTok. Anybody? And so bringing into focus what the Africa agenda is, so Agenda 2063, what are African priorities, and scoring US companies against African priorities, going beyond the glossy. And one of the partners is the governance council, is it? That is in South Africa. So we got to not only bring out women in leadership, we got to bring out independent board composition. How many are independent directors? We got to bring out impact, so the engagement in the community. And we got to bring out technology in the form of energy, renewable energy. And so we created a set of questions accessible via the web. So it's self-reporting with supporting documentation. And then we judged according to a score that their own data provided. And then we gave awards by company size, and then an overall award for the company that scored the highest on environment, social, and corporate governance quality. I think that for a starting position, for a launch, we did a lot of heavy lifting, and we're looking forward to doing this again this year and expanding the program to better attract small businesses of smaller size and a broader footprint across the continent.
And I'll give you just a list of who the winners were.
Wait, we have a drum roll. All right, go for it.
So in the medium-sized category, and there are medium-sized in Africa, much larger in the U.S. NBA Africa was the bronze winner.
NBA is in basketball.
National Basketball Association, yeah. We did have to explain who NBA was. Fayus Incorporated was the silver award winner, and Honeywell was the gold award winner. In the large category, the bronze winner was Kimberly Clark. And it's interesting that in South Africa, a number of these countries had their headquarters in South Africa. You've had a U.S. presence for over 120 years. Kellogg's, Kellogg's cornflakes, they've been in South Africa for over 100 years. Alistair Group was the silver prize winner in large, and then also Massmart Holdings, which is actually owned by Walmart, was the large winner. And they actually doubled to the point that was mentioned about our ESG award as our overall winner for ESG in Africa.
Oh, fantastic. Well, and we have with us Bob Wakisa. And I'm so sorry, Bob, I didn't introduce you at the beginning. He is the director. I am hoping that you are with us. You're looking a little frozen right now. A very warm man. We see a little frozen there. But at his end is the chair of the Center for the Study of the U.S. and really the man who thought up this whole idea. So, Bob, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you were with us, and because I was looking out towards the audience, and the screen is behind you. So, welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Thank you very much, and happy to join virtually. We, as we say here, we are together.
Yes. Well, if I can have you talk about what made you decide to do this? Where did this idea come from?
I think Michael did explain the whole story well.
Yes, but I'm asking for you. When you came up with this brilliant idea, how did you come up with it?
I was going to explain that just before the declaration of emergencies across the world, I and our director, Gilbert Kajagala, who is right there, went to Michael's office in the northern suburbs of Joburg. Michael stood right there. And we shared a couple of ideas on what we could do to boost Africa-US partnership through university-inclined initiatives. And what came out clearly was that there are very many American companies on the continent, but nobody knows where they are, what they do, how they perform, and particularly their contributions to African economies, contributions in terms of employment, contributions to GDPs, to tech transfer, and so forth. And so there and then in Michael's office, and I think Michael can attest to this, we decided we are going to do US Business in Africa Awards as an entry point for both celebrating American companies, creating knowledge, and also creating a corporate diplomacy program. And subsequent to that, then everybody else came on board, including yourself, Carl. So thanks, that is the short of it.
Well, thank you. Well, Dr. Winston, if I can come to you because you then are partnering on this, and the importance of an academic institution in being involved in this. Normally, the other business awards, as you mentioned, come from the Corporate Council on Africa or the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Why is it important that academic institutions are involved in this?
Well, let me, is it on? Let me first start by saying thank you for inviting me to participate. It's good to see that, Bob, you were able to join us. We weren't sure you were able to do that. Well, first, I came involved because of the involvement actually of our business school. And that was through the effort of Professor Gene Wells, who was looking at this whole idea of businesses and promoting businesses in Africa. And when we were thinking about this, we were thinking of, well, how do we get involved? The center And as Dr. Johnson mentioned, the Center for African Studies in Howard University has trained more students in African languages than any university in the United States. As a matter of fact, we, the center, through our student body, translated the U.S. strategy for Africa into Swahili, Amharic, Zulu, and Yoruba. And if you go online to the center's website now, you can see that strategy in those 4 languages. We were aware of this issue of language. And when we were thinking about this concept of businesses, what we felt, well, we need to talk about this whole issue of language and cultural competency and the importance of that in business transactions and actually in partnership in general. So I was simply just moderating a panel, but now I'm supposed to talk about it. So. Okay, so what do I say? So I'm going to speak from both a professional and personal perspective. In 2013, I was in Mozambique doing my research for my dissertation, title of which was South Cooperation, the role of Brazilian investment in Mozambique's agricultural transformation. It sounds like a long title, but you'll get it in a minute. So here's what's my hypothesis with this. South-South paradigm, and some of you who are African scholars I know may understand that, as indicated by the Brazil-Mozambique agricultural cooperation, would lead to a positive transformation. Okay, that partnership would be better. So why Brazil? Brazil, part of the BRICS. Those of you who are familiar with that acronym, though, it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They were espousing a new model of development, the South-South cooperative, due to the failure, at least the perceived failure, I think it's probably actual failure, of many of the traditional North-South models. So Brazil is a powerhouse in South America, accounting for over 50% of the wealth, population, and military budget. Brazil is more powerful in South America than China and India in their regions. Brazil, in the global economy, moved up from the role of 14th to 7th in 14 years. Brazil is a third largest exporter in the world, now the 4th actually, was the 2nd largest soybean producer, but is now number 1, surpassing the United States. So Brazil has this record of improvement, moving from what would some might consider a 3rd-class country to 1st class. So let's look at the commonalities relative to Africa, specifically Mozambique. Brazil, once part of the same landmass. Those of you who are African scholars know that landmass was Gondwana land. You can look at the two and say, oh, they look like they were together at one time. Brazil and Mozambique shares the same climate, both being between the equator and Tropic of Capricorn, 0 and 30 degrees latitude. Both were former colonies of Portugal, same language, Portuguese, similar inequities common with colonial people. More Africans, and those of you again who study African studies know that more Africans were sent to Brazil than any other country. In the world, 51% of people in Brazil claim African heritage. Africa is clearly seen in Brazil's culture, specifically music, food, and religion. And the then President Lula, 2013, who is now the president again, claimed that Brazil owed a historical debt to Africa. So I thought, well, wow, they should be a great partner.
We need to move, sorry, but, and I'm gonna be a journalist because you're not answering my question.
Okay. So the question, so let me just quickly.
So why does an educational institution need to be involved in an awards for U.S. business?
Because we believe that the issue of partnership needs to have a deeper dimension than simply partnering. That simply, and this is what I was coming to, that simply being a partner, simply having the same language and the same culture does not necessarily translate into economic equality and advancement. See, and that's what I discovered in my studies. Yeah, they look like they would be a great partner. But the research showed, and my research showed, that Brazil was getting much more out of this than Mozambique ever could. This was demonstrated in if you look at the difference between the exchange of export and import. Brazil was importing or exporting $40 million or $1 billion to Mozambique, and Mozambique was exporting only 20. So there needed to be an understanding that partnership simply because you have the same language and perceived culture does not necessarily equate into partnership. But I have to give one other last explanation real quick.
Okay.
And this is my personal story.
We want to be able to get back to everybody.
Yeah. So this is my personal story.
Yeah, but very briefly, because we
Very
really
briefly,
do need
my
to get
personal
back.
story. So I'm a Black African American. I'm in Mozambique speaking Portuguese, studying about this topic, and I'm outside socializing with my friends, and we're drinking their Mozambican beer and having these conversations, and all of a sudden, my friend, I hear these people call me a name, and I said, "Hey, what did they just say?" And he said, "I don't mind them." I said, "Well, what did they just say?" I could speak Portuguese, but I couldn't quite understand what they were saying. He said, "They called you white man." I said, "They called me white man?" I said, "Okay, why would they call me white man? I'm Black, I'm African American, I speak Portuguese. Isn't that enough?" Because to them, I was American. Just because I was Black and just because I spoke Portuguese did not obliterate my main perspective, which was American, and they saw that as white. And this is the message for African Americans. So I get partnering. This is an important message for African Americans. Just because you're African American and you show up in Africa and you want to be a partner, don't assume that they see you as African American. They saw me as American and white. That was really critical in me understanding how to partner. And as a researcher, as an academic, that's information that we thought critical, that we needed to bring to bear in the discussion of partnerships of businesses, the importance in understanding the value of language and culture and how they perceive you and how you perceive them. That's your answer.
All right. Well, thank you. Those are very important points. Let's get back to the awards and what happened at the actual awards. So, Michael, maybe you can take us through how it went.
So the awards were really broken into 2 days of activity. I think in the infinite wisdom of our colleagues at Access, a conference was added the day after. So we had, on the evening, Friday evening, we had an awards ceremony, and we did it with dinner, with music, and so it was quite a festive activity. So we had rounds of awards, and then we had networking opportunities. A key partner that I haven't heard us mention thus far was the U.S. Consulate. The U.S. Consulate General came and gave one of the leading presentations the head of AmCham came and gave one of our leading presentations. So we had a series of presentations and acknowledgments. Mima Nedeljkovic, who was the co-chair, came and spoke. The other key actor in the awards was the business school at WITS. And also the vice chancellor of WITS came. So it really was the leadership of the university showed up in full. And then the next day, we had a series of topical discussions about doing business between the U.S. and Africa. And I think the comments that you mentioned about some of the enlightenment of navigating the continent as an African American came up in one of the panels. We talked about the case studies that I mentioned. We had the head of the William Davidson Institute come over from the University of Michigan, and Joyce, again, led the activity, but also other colleagues on the judging panel spoke about that process. So it was a very full weekend. I will say a backdrop, and this was a testament to really all the people who thought this was a worthy initiative. It has happened twice. Again, I've been in South Africa 20 years. There was a warning of a terrorist attack. And so they were saying, if you're on the Friday of, in the morning, good gatherings of Americans shouldn't really get together. And that gave a lot of pause to the planning, because we thought, should we cancel this? Should we have it? And we thought we should go ahead with it. And we had a full room, which was, again, a testament to people believing that all would be well. And it turned out the next day, it really wasn't about us. There was some other programs happening. But it was a very, for us, Joyce mentioned, heavy lifting to get it off the ground. And there was a sense of relief, because again, it started in COVID. We decided the first year, still there was too much of a lingering COVID environment in terms of travel. So we pushed it out a year. I should say that at